It was just a wedding photo, until you zoom in on the groom's hand. Dr. Marcus Chen had been the chief conservator at the Atlanta History Center for nearly 20 years. He believed he had seen every type of Civil War-era photograph in existence. The museum's archive held thousands of images from the 1860s and 1870s, each a fragment of a turbulent chapter in American history. Yet the photograph that arrived on his desk one gray January morning in 2024 was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It came from the estate of Helen Morrison, a 93-year-old retired schoolteacher and amateur genealogist who had devoted decades to collecting artifacts connected to African American history in Georgia. Her will directed that the entirety of her collection be given to the Atlanta History Center. The photograph was pristine, preserved in an acid-free envelope, tucked inside a wooden box. It measured roughly 6 by 8 inches, mounted on thick cardboard backing, the kind typical of professional post-Civil War studios. Marcus eased the image beneath his examination lamp. It depicted a wedding portrait staged in a photographer's studio. Behind the couple was a painted backdrop of an elegant parlor, columns, draped curtains, an illusion of wealth and refinement. The bride and groom stood centered, dressed in their finest garments. The bride wore a dark gown with a high collar and lace-trimmed sleeves, her hair styled intricately with small flowers or ribbons threaded through her braids. The groom stood tall beside her in a dark suit, white collar, and vest adorned with a watch chain. Both were African American. Both stared solemnly into the camera with quiet pride. Stamped along the bottom border, Sterling and Associates, Atlanta, Georgia, 1871. The date alone was remarkable. Just 6 years after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, when formerly enslaved people were first building lives as free citizens. A small table stood beside the couple, with a Bible atop it. The groom's right hand rested on the scripture. His left hung at his side. The portrait was dignified, moving, perfectly composed. Marcus began his routine evaluation, noting light fading at the edges. Then he froze. Something about the groom's hand on the Bible looked unusual. Even without magnification, there was something there. He reached for his magnifying glass. The skin bore scars, irregular patches of light tissue, the kind left by shackles or chains. But it was the ring on the groom's left hand that made Marcus inhale sharply. Wedding rings were not rare in photographs of this era, but this one was different. Even through sepia tones, he could see its strange texture, rough, hammered, uneven. Not the gleam of gold or the soft glow of silver. It was dark, almost black, matte, like iron. Why would a groom wear an iron ring at his wedding? Iron wasn't used for jewelry, not in 1871, unless there was a reason. Marcus photographed the image in high resolution and enhanced it digitally. Enlarged across his screen, the ring revealed forge marks, irregular ridges left by hammer and anvil. Along the band, he could make out a repeating pattern, tiny indentations forming a chain-like motif. A chain, on an iron ring, worn by a formerly enslaved man at his wedding. Marcus leaned back, pulse quickening. He remembered accounts from historical journals, a rare practice among newly freed couples, in which iron from broken shackles or chains was melted down and reforged into wedding bands. A transformation from bondage to devotion, pain to permanence. An act of liberation worn on the skin. He needed answers. On the back of the photograph, beneath the photographer's stamp, someone had written in faded pencil, David and Clara, married November 18th, 1871. Elegant handwriting, likely added years later. Without those names, they might have remained faceless forever. Marcus accessed the museum's genealogical records and entered the names with the wedding date. Moments later, a match surfaced. David Freeman, approximately 28, married Clara Washington, 24, in Atlanta on November 18th, 1871. The record was registered at Friendship Baptist Church and documented in the Fulton County Register. More pieces fell into place. The 1870 census listed David Freeman as a blacksmith, literate, born in Georgia. Clara Washington appeared in the same census as a domestic worker, also literate, residing in a boarding house for black women on Decatur Street. Freedman's bureau documents from 1865 offered the missing link, David Freeman, 22, formerly enslaved by Robert Freeman of Clark County, Georgia. A note included one haunting detail, scars on wrists and ankles from extended time in chains, exactly like the marks visible in the photo. They were from being restrained for so long that permanent damage had occurred. Clara's record was equally revealing. It stated, Clara, approximately 18 years old, formerly enslaved by Thomas Washington of Fulton County. Literate, taught to read by the Washington family children. Seeking family members, Mother Sarah, brothers Thomas and James, whereabouts unknown. Like many formerly enslaved people, Clara had been separated from her family. Similar notations appeared in thousands of Freedman's Bureau records. Parents, siblings, and children, torn apart by sale, left searching for each other in the years after emancipation. Marcus also learned that Clara had been married once before, during slavery, to a man named Joseph. He had been conscripted by Confederate forces and never returned. Her marriage to David in 1871 was not simply a beginning, it was a rebirth after loss and grief. Further research revealed references to David's blacksmith shop in Atlanta city directories from the early 1870s. Freeman, David, colored. Blacksmith shop, Decatur Street near the railroad depot. Even more remarkable was an 1872 article in the Atlanta Advocate. Mr. Freeman has become known for creating wedding bands from iron that once bound us, transforming symbols of oppression into symbols of love and freedom. David Freeman's work had spread quickly through Atlanta's African-American community. His forge became a place of pilgrimage. Couples would bring pieces of iron chain or broken shackles, asking him to transform what once enslaved them into something that symbolized devotion and autonomy. An Advocate article in 1873 stated, Mr. Freeman's forge has become known throughout our community for his special craft. Couples planning to marry often bring him pieces of iron chains or shackles from their time in bondage. He has performed the service for over 50 couples since establishing his shop. 50 couples by 1873, rings forged from chains, each one a vow, a reclamation, a declaration of personhood. Marcus found a letter David wrote in 1874 to a minister in Savannah, explaining both technique and philosophy. When people bring me the iron that once held them, they are trusting me with their pain and their hope. Each ring requires 4 to 6 hours of work. I do not charge money for this work. This is not business. This is ministry. David described how he purified and reforged the iron through repeated heating, folding, and hammering, how some couples asked for the scars in the metal to remain visible, while others wanted the past smoothed and polished. He explained how people stayed beside the forge as the metal glowed and softened, sharing stories of chains cutting skin, of family members sold away, of days filled with terror and nights without hope. The ring, David believed, must hold not just iron, but memory. Church marriage registers from multiple congregations confirmed this tradition. Ring made by David Freeman. Rings from chains forged by Brother Freeman. One entry moved Marcus deeply, found in the Wheat Street Baptist Church Register from 1872. Married August 3rd, Samuel Jenkins and Elizabeth Porter. Rings made by Brother Freeman from chains that had bound both bride and groom when enslaved on the same plantation, separated by sale in 1858, reunited after emancipation, now joined in holy matrimony. Letters suggested Freeman's influence spread to Savannah, Charleston, New Orleans, Richmond. The forging of rings from chains became a cultural movement. Weddings doubled as acts of resistance, rings as declarations. We were owned, but now we belong to no one but each other. Marcus wanted to know what the wedding day in the photograph felt like. He found the answer in the diary of Reverend Isaiah Grant, preserved in the Atlanta University Center archives. Grant's entry for November 18th, 1871, David and Clara's wedding day, was long and overflowing with emotion. Today I had the profound honor of joining in holy matrimony David Freeman and Clara Washington at Friendship Baptist Church. More than 100 people attended, a testament to the respect this couple has earned. Grant described David in a carefully tailored suit he saved for months to afford, and Clara in a dress she had sewn herself, silk, deep blue. He wrote of the congregation moved to tears, remembering that only a few years earlier their marriages had not been legally recognized. Then Grant recorded the moment captured forever in the photograph, the moment Marcus first noticed. When the time came for the exchange of rings, Brother David presented a ring forged from the iron chains that once bound him. Sister Clara wept as he placed it on her finger. There was not a dry eye in the church. Grant's reflection was transformative. Just as Brother David took chains and shaped them into a ring, so too are we shaping our suffering into strength. This marriage declares, we are free, we are human, we are worthy of love. After the ceremony, the bridal party walked to Sterling & Associates photography studio in downtown Atlanta. A black couple, dressed in elegance, walking freely through streets where they had once been denied personhood. Grant wrote that David insisted the photographer pose him with his hand upon the Bible, the ring fully visible. He wanted future generations to see, to know, to remember. The celebration lasted into the night. Music, food, dancing, joy unrestrained. Grant concluded, "Love is resistance. To love openly, to build a family, to claim a future. This is revolution. This is how we win." Marcus sat in silence after reading those words, written 153 years earlier, and still alive. While David's work as a blacksmith left tangible traces in historical records, Clara's life was harder to track. But Marcus was determined to understand her story fully. He found Clara's Freedmen's Bureau testimony from 1865, recorded by an agent. In it, Clara states she was born on the Washington plantation in Fulton County around 1847. She was separated from her mother, Sarah, and her brothers, Thomas and James, in 1859 when they were sold to a trader bound for Mississippi. Clara was kept on the Washington plantation to work in the house. She reports being taught to read by the Washington children. Though this was against Mr. Washington's will, he beat her severely when he discovered she was literate. Clara had also registered a previous marriage. She states she was married according to slave custom to a man named Joseph in 1863. Joseph was conscripted to work on Confederate fortifications in 1864 and never returned. Clara never learned whether he lived or died. This revelation recontextualized everything. Her marriage to David in 1871 was a second chance at love after loss and uncertainty. Marcus found more about Clara in church records. She had joined Friendship Baptist Church in 1866 and quickly became active. Minutes from 1867 to 1870 mentioned her repeatedly, organizing literacy classes for formerly enslaved adults, collecting funds for families whose homes had been burned by white terrorists, and testifying about violence she had witnessed. In a particularly moving entry from 1869, the church recorded, "Sister Clara spoke to the congregation about her continued search for her mother and brothers. She asked for prayers, stating that despite her sorrow, she holds faith that families torn apart will be reunited through God's grace." Marcus found no evidence that Clara ever located her family. The search continued for years, yet they had vanished into slavery and war. Still, Clara did not allow loss to break her. She built a new life and eventually found love with David. Most significantly, Marcus discovered that Clara had testified before a congressional committee in 1870, investigating violence against African Americans in Georgia. Her testimony was powerful. "We are told we are free, but we are not free to live without fear. We build, and they burn down what we build. We try to vote, and they beat us, but we will not give up. We will continue to build, continue to learn, continue to fight for the freedom that is rightfully ours." This was the woman who married David Freeman in November 1871, a survivor, an activist, someone who refused to be broken. When she and David exchanged rings forged from slave chains, they declared survival, defiance, and their determination to build a life together. Marcus traced David and Clara's future through census records. The 1880 census listed them still living in Atlanta on Decker Street. David was recorded as a blacksmith, age 37. Clara was listed as a seamstress, age 34. They had 2 children, Robert, age 6, and Sarah, age 3. Marcus felt joy at this discovery. They had built the family they dreamed of. The 1900 census showed them still together in their 50s. Robert was recorded as a teacher at a colored school. Sarah was listed as a dressmaker working alongside her mother. Marcus found Robert Freeman's name in Atlanta University records. He graduated in 1895 and became an educator, teaching mathematics to African American children. Sarah Freeman appeared in city directories as a dressmaker and later as the owner of a small shop on Auburn Avenue. She became a successful businesswoman and respected community member. David's 1906 obituary was extensive. It read in part, "David Freeman, respected blacksmith and community leader, dies at 63. Mr. Freeman was known for his skill as a blacksmith and for his service to newly married couples. For 40 years, he crafted wedding rings from the chains of slavery. He created rings for hundreds of couples and never charged for this service, considering it his ministry." It continued, "He is survived by his beloved wife, Clara, his son, Robert, his daughter, Sarah, 6 grandchildren, and the hundreds of couples whose marriages were blessed by his work. Clara lived another 15 years. Her 1921 obituary stated, "Clara Freeman, age 75, pioneer and pillar of community." Mrs. Freeman was born into slavery and lived to see her grandchildren educated and successful. She was known for her literacy work and for her testimony before Congress about violence against colored citizens. She and her late husband David were married for 35 years and were considered one of the founding couples of Atlanta's free colored community. Marcus found one final document, a 1920 letter from Sarah Freeman to a museum offering to donate her parents' wedding photograph and Clara's ring. It read, "My father made hundreds of these rings for couples in our community. He told me once that every ring was an act of defiance, taking what was meant to enslave us and transforming it into something that celebrated our humanity. He said that as long as people remembered what these rings meant, slavery would never truly win. I offer these items in hopes that future generations will understand what my parents endured and what they built through that endurance." Marcus wondered whether any of David Freeman's rings had survived into the present day. He began contacting museums with African American history collections across the South. Most responses were negative, until Dr. Angela Price, curator at a small museum in Savannah, wrote, "We have 3 rings in our collection that match your description. They were donated by different families over the years, all with similar stories. Rings made from slave chains, worn at weddings in the 1870s and 1880s. Would you be interested in examining them?" Marcus was on a plane to Savannah 2 days later. The rings were extraordinary. each different in size and detail, but all sharing essential characteristics: dark iron, hammered texture, visible evidence of careful handcrafting. Heavier than modern rings, substantial, weathered with age. Dr. Price provided documentation for each. One donated in 1968 by a woman whose great-grandparents married in 1873. Another from a family whose ancestors married in 1879. The third, discovered during a 1990s house renovation, accompanied by a note reading, "Married 1876, rings from chains, never forget." Marcus examined each under magnification. Hammer marks were visible, small facets where iron had been repeatedly struck. Welds showed where pieces of metal had been forged together. 2 rings held decorative details, one engraved with a chain-link pattern around the edge, another with tiny crossed hammers, perhaps the maker's signature. Dr. Price had arranged for materials analysis by a university engineering department. A metallurgist named Dr. James Wu examined the rings using X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy, and his findings confirmed Marcus's theories. These rings were unquestionably wrought iron, consistent with mid-19th century American iron. The structure showed repeated folding and hammering, the exact method a blacksmith would use to consolidate multiple pieces of scrap iron into one object. Under the microscope, Dr. Wu pointed out boundary lines where different pieces of metal had been forge welded, probably 3 or 4 pieces originally, likely links from chains or fragments of shackles, heated to nearly 2,500 degrees and hammered until they fused. What's remarkable, Dr. Wu explained, is the craftsmanship. Forging iron into a ring is difficult. These were made by someone highly skilled, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus thanked Dr. Wu and returned to the museum. While the staff carefully repacked the rings, Dr. Price asked what he intended to do with his research. Marcus replied that he wanted to create an exhibition, something that would help people understand what the rings represented: love, resistance, freedom declared through fire and iron. 3 months after beginning his research, Marcus received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from Dorothy Freeman Watson, the great-great-granddaughter of David and Clara Freeman. Her family still held the original ring David forged for Clara, worn for 35 years, preserved across 5 generations. After seeing news of Marcus's work, the family had chosen to donate the ring to the Atlanta History Center. When Marcus opened the small box, his hands shook. Resting inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was Clara's ring, the same ring visible in the 1871 wedding photograph, dark and hammered, irregular yet beautiful. He studied it closely. It showed every characteristic he recognized from the Savannah examples: the textured surface, the forge-welded seams, the intentional imperfections of handcraft. But this ring had something more: full provenance, an unbroken chain of custody linking it directly to Clara, David, and the history he'd been piecing together. Along the inner edge, barely visible in the old photograph, were stamped letters: DF 1871, David Freeman's signature, and the year he made it. Marcus contacted Dorothy to learn more. She shared stories passed down through her family. David had saved fragments of the chains that once held him in bondage, keeping them for years after emancipation, until he felt emotionally ready to transform them. When he finally forged Clara's ring, it was both memorial and promise that their love would outlast everything designed to break them. Clara wore it daily throughout their marriage, and for the remaining 15 years of her life after David's death. It was then passed to Sarah, who kept it safe, and later to her daughter, then to Dorothy. 5 generations had guarded it. But now, Dorothy said, it's time to share it. This story belongs to more than us. It belongs to anyone who needs to know that love can transform even suffering into something beautiful. The ring was officially accessioned into the museum's collection. The centerpiece of the exhibition Marcus was already developing, a story of transformation, resilience, and freedom forged from the iron of enslavement. The ring that began as shackles became a wedding band, then a family heirloom, and finally a teaching artifact, a testament to survival and unbreakable hope. 8 months after Marcus first studied the Freeman photograph, the Atlanta History Center opened the exhibition Forged in Freedom, Wedding Rings from Slave Chains. It opened November 18, 2024, exactly 153 years after David and Clara's wedding. At the center stood their enlarged wedding portrait, 5 feet tall. Beside it, under controlled lighting, rested Clara's ring, the very ring from the photo, preserved across nearly a century and a half. Text panels told the story: David and Clara Freeman on their wedding day in 1871. The iron ring on Clara's hand forged from slavery's chains. David Freeman, a blacksmith who repurposed instruments of bondage into symbols of love, crafting rings for hundreds of newly freed couples during Reconstruction, never charging, believing it his ministry. The Savannah rings were displayed alongside, each with its own lineage. Interactive screens demonstrated the forging process. Audio stations replayed descendant interviews. One section focused entirely on David, his philosophy, the Reverend's diary, newspaper articles, and enlarged details of his scarred hands and the textured iron ring. Another section explored the broader history: enslaved marriages, denied legality, families torn apart, and the fierce urgency with which newly freed people claimed the right to union and family. Visitors came, paused, read, and changed. Some stared at the photo for minutes, absorbing the weight of the story. An elderly black woman, tears falling, whispered that her grandmother had mentioned rings like these, and she never knew they were real. A young couple stood together, imagining the courage it took to turn something born of pain into something meant for love. The exhibition became one of the museum's most visited. Articles spread nationwide. Scholars launched new research. And Marcus, often standing near the photograph, thought of David and Clara, survivors who built dignity from devastation, who raised children, strengthened their community, and whose love continues to speak. David's final legacy was not iron, but transformation. Hundreds of rings, each one a circle of defiance, possibility, love, a forging of freedom,